If you've been playing video games for a long period, you might came across an IP that caught your attention, but either weren't sure at first glance, or you didn't get the opportunity because you were on a limited budget. Whatever the circumstances, eventually you give it a chance in hopes it will be good. However, after several hours investment, you realise it isn't engaging. That was my experience with Primal, a 2003 PS2 release that left me disappointed as far as fun factor is concerned, as it didn't take long for the game's issues to surface. Primal follows a young lass named Jen, who's in a relationship with Lewis, a lead singer of a metal rock group. After leaving a nightclub, both are assaulted by a monstrous figure. Lewis is taken while Jen is left for dead. She wakes up in a hospital only to realise she's having an out-of-body experience and is greeted by Scree, a gargoyle who seeks her help. Scree explains that all four realms within Oblivion are in turmoil because Abaddon, the governor of chaos and corruption, is trying to overthrow the balance with Arella, the governor of order and justice. The power of each kingdom is channeled through the Nexus and is controlled by Kronos, but with Abaddon's influence the balance is close to collapse. As Jen and Scree respectively, they must go through all four kingdoms to restore order and find where Lewis is. Throughout the game, players control both avatars and can be switched at any point, though when to do so depends on the scenario. Scree is used for solving environmental puzzles, while Jen excels in slaying demonic creatures. For the most part they'll stick together, but they'll need to split up for accessing different routes or solve puzzles so they can be reunited. The combat is combo based, as Jen relies on light and heavy attacks which are controlled with the L2 and R2 buttons. However, unlike other games, the buttons are pressure sensitive, meaning how hard they're pressed determines what moves are performed. The problem is a PS2 controller didn't have trigger buttons, so trying to execute light and heavy attacks is a troublesome affair. As I'm reviewing this PS4 port, in theory performing combos would be much easier considering a PS4 controller has triggers, yet even on the latest hardware, fighting NPCs is no different because the inputs aren't pressure sensitive enough, and it doesn't help that Jen can only focus on one target while being at the mercy of taking cheap blows. Granted, Jen is capable of defending herself by blocking or with counterattacks, though it isn't reliable because the timing isn't always consistent. As the name implies, Primal allows players to morph into one of four demonic beings, with each providing their own traits. Farai form allows Jen to run faster and jump higher, Undine gives her ability to breathe underwater, Wraith can slow down time as well as dodge at breakneck speeds, and Jin allows weapon switching while increasing her damage output, but more on that later. Jen can transform at any time, but her demonic powers are governed by energy that Scree consumes either from downed enemies or from energy stones within the environment, and this energy can be discharged if one of her forms is running low. Unfortunately, because of how long it takes to get all abilities, there's little management the player needs to do, as the abundance of energy within each location makes this aspect less of a concern. Because Scree is a puzzle specialist, he relies on lodestones for possessing statues or to manipulate large objects, yet because these segments happen at specific points, the abundance of these lodestones, and the fact his supplies stack, you don't have to manage your supply often. On the other hand, the puzzles, although basic, make the most of using both characters, and each one keeps these sections fresh, though because of how the combat is developed, the overall gameplay feels uneven. When fights do happen, it's simply a matter of button mashing your way to victory, and it's made worse with the last demonic form, as Jen's DPS is insanely overpowered. There are even moments where foes will watch their allies get slaughtered and do nothing about it, and some engagements can be avoided entirely. That's not to say you won't die in Primal, but if that was going to happen, you'll be saving your progress in advance because there's no autosave. Granted, Primal does warn you to save before boss encounters, though it would have been beneficial if an autosave mechanic was considered, not to mention the game over screens can't be skipped, which is odd as all other cutscenes are skippable. Aside from her combat skills, Jen is capable of performing stealth takedowns with the trigger buttons, but this strategy is useless since enemies are combat ready, and as for Scree, he can turn himself into stone by pressing the circle button, yet this is pointless as he'll do it automatically when Jen engages in fights, and it's a similar story when he consumes energy, as all you need to do is put Jen nearby an enemy corpse and Scree will take over, rather than controlling him and do it manually. Scree can also bring Jen back to life, assuming he can get to a rift gate in time, but since I was saving on a frequent basis, this aspect of the game was never important. In short, what's the point of having features if they're not going to have any significance? The camera settings for some bizarre reason were set inverted, so when I went to alter these I found out it was the normal setup. It's understandable some may prefer inverted controls, however I don't understand why SE Cambridge would set the camera settings inverted, only to label them as normal, because all it does is confuses the player. In some situations I found myself disorientated, especially in the second realm since Jen can swim in all directions. Yes, the camera will self-right itself when she isn't moving, though it's exasperating when you're pointing the wrong way while figuring out where you need to go. Speaking of where you need to go, mission objectives are given by interacting with Scree or Jen depending on who you're controlling, but due to the scale of each map there's going to be backtracking involved. Luckily there are rift gates that, once found, can be used to alleviate some vexation. Though of course, if you want to know where your next destination is, you're going to be pulling up the map frequently. For a PS4 port, the game looks fine whether you're playing in 4x3 or 16x9. The voice acting is good, which is important since Jen and Scree are the protagonists. You will run into other characters of course, and they too give off good performances. However, I did notice the odd audio glitch within specific cutscenes. The story was decent, but it could have been better, as Jen seems to have the inclination of pushing her luck, while Scree is the individual who gives out exposition, and at times the pacing does drag. I also didn't care about Jen's relationship with Lewis, since they have very little screen time compared to the rest of the game and thus didn't have a significant impact. Also, there are parts of the story that didn't make sense. When Jen uncovers her powers for the first time, Scree tells her she was brought into oblivion so Jen could be a hybrid. Then if Scree knew about her origin, why would he ask about her tattoo earlier? It does imply Lewis was involved in some matter, and therefore justifies his kidnapping, yet it seems illogical for Scree by asking that question. And if the game considers Mortalis, which is the realm where Jen and Lewis are from, then shouldn't there be 5 realms in total instead of 4? And if so, then Mortalis would be discharging energy into the Nexus like the others. The music is comprised of orchestral for exploration and heavy metal when violence breaks out, and both are well composed, but the tracks during combat did become repetitive. Likewise, Jen's demonic transformations were impressive at first, but they too lost their appeal due to the mandatory need of her powers, and you can't skip them. Ultimately, Primal's one of those games where you play it for what it is, only to realise you're going through the motions. It may have an okay story, basic and varied puzzles, and good voice acting, but the unrefined combat makes the overall gameplay uneven, and the story is nonsensical in places. Primal may allow you to transform into a demonic hybrid, but it couldn't transform itself enough into a better experience.